All right. So I want to say, Margaret, just to follow you, I'm so intrigued by the ideas of decanonization, as well as the ways in which teaching online has shown us the ruptures of colonial Western education and has kind of prompted us to go beyond. And I think fits really nicely with Lindsay and I's presentation, sharing best practices for supporting gender and sexual diversity in remote or physical classrooms and thinking with decolonial pedagogies as how to do this. So as Robin cued, Lindsay Brent was also part of this presentation, creating it and also creating the document. I'll show you all in a minute. We saw her this morning. If you didn't get a chance to meet her this morning, she's an educational developer of Indigenous pedagogies and ways of knowing at the CTL. She's also an adjunct lecturer at the Smith School of Business, and her email is there. I'm Dan Venna. I teach in the film and media department here at Queen's as an adjunct assistant professor. I also want to introduce myself as a queer trans white settler of Italian background. I consider myself disabled in relation to and by capitalism. I'm also a death positive radical spiritualist, and I use a lot of this kind of intentionality in my own teaching. I have a shaved head, I'm wearing a green shirt, and I'm also speaking in front of a blue wall with a shelf behind me for those who would like to orientate themselves to my image. So Lindsay and we have been working over the year to create essentially a best practice document that could be used in the remote setting, the blended learning setting, and the in-person setting, knowing that we'll often take a lot of what we've been doing and shifting it into the physical classroom once again when we get there. So we've been working on creating a document that we would like to, as goal number 3 shows, share and circulate with the Queen CTL community and beyond by this summer. We have the document, it's kind of set and ready to go. It's more us putting on the kind of bells and whistles of this document so we could get it nicely designed and sent out to everyone. But what we wanted to do is create an organic, continually developing document that prompts self-reflection on the part of the instructor and also offers strategies for inclusivity in the classroom. And the goal of this document is to highlight the intersections of decolonial, queer, and trans projects, which thankfully now, I think in the institution are starting to be kind of linked into larger intersectional projects, but are often still siloed in conversations of equity and inclusivity. There's, a decolonial strategy or model, and then there's a gender and sexuality strategy and model, and sometimes the two don't seem to overlap. So we wanted to kind of infuse those things together. As well, you'll see efforts to kind of decolonize queer and trans projects by the ways or wordings we use in the document. So we use the acronym 2S LGBTQ+. 2S stands for Two Spirit, which is a term adopted by Indigenous communities to self-express gender and sexual diversity and to celebrate that, but is and cannot be translated into Western concepts of gender, Western or colonial concepts of sexuality and gender. As well, in our document, we also show a newly updated pride flag. We have moved beyond the kind of 6-color rainbow flag you may have gotten used to, especially this year with the Black Lives Matter movement. We are seeing a greater concentrated effort to bring conversations of race in with conversations of queerness. And so that is the representation here of the black and brown stripes, as well the blue, pink, and white are the trans flags. And trans folks have been historically marginalized from the gay and lesbian community as well as non-binary folks. So you'll see in our document a way that we're calling attention into the larger projects of intersectionality. So what really prompted the creation of this document is one day I took a workshop with Lindsay on decolonial pedagogies. And one of the things Lindsay asked us to reflect on is, well, who do you collaborate with? Do you collaborate with Indigenous thinkers, creators, and scholars? Who have you reached out to greater your understanding of things? And it struck me that I hadn't. And I thought I was so well versed in these topics and conversations, but I actually wasn't doing the work of reaching out to others, even at my own institution, to see how I can better my own teaching through collaboration. And so after talking with Lindsay about this, we kind of realized we had things to offer one another. And so Lindsay graciously kind of talked with me about questions I had about Indigenous ways of knowing and learning, but also kind of opened up that queer and trans issues were a bit of a blind spot in her teaching. And so we kind of came together and decided that this would be a beautiful document to create for the Queen's community. So here is Lindsay with a few words on it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Brandt, and I'm an educational developer, Indigenous Pedagogies and Ways of Knowing in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm also an adjunct lecturer in the Smith School of Business. I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I had to work with Dan Venna on this resource that we've developed around best practices for supporting gender and sexuality in the classroom. When we were chatting and meeting regularly to talk about this resource and just our own experiences with supporting students, we came to realize that a lot of the techniques for creating an inclusive classroom community that I've used through a decolonial lens and through Indigenous ways of knowing were very similar to what we needed to or wanted to achieve with supporting students with sexual and gender diversity within the classroom as well. So there was a lot of overlap in our best practices and the tips and tricks that we shared with each other that worked well. And we really thought about what does it take to create a classroom community that's inclusive and supportive. And really it came down to creating a community of care and seeing our students and learn as learners, but also as teachers, and realizing that we can learn a lot from our students as well. And recognizing that inclusion is a journey and it's a mindset that we need to develop as educators, and just chatting together and working through this resource development was a huge opportunity for both of us to learn from each other and to hear about experiences that we had in the classroom and to compare notes and kind of see how we handled those and what approaches worked well. And it was just a really great opportunity to engage with each other and to figure out the best ways that we can support our students. So I think it was amazing, and I'm hoping that this resource will prove useful for you as well, and that you'll find some great ideas in it, and that you can share it with others and have similar conversations to the ones that Dan and I had as well, because I think those conversations really solidified for me the importance of having professionals that are like-minded or share some commonalities and are committed to a growth mindset. So it was a great networking opportunity and an opportunity to build a community of care amongst ourselves and also to figure out ways to transfer that skill set to our students as well. So thank you very much for attending today, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Nope, we already saw your greeting. One more, flip forward. All right, so what I really appreciate about Lindsay's words, I mean, just to highlight a few, is this idea of community care and inclusivity as a mindset, and more than that, as a practice. And with that, if we understand inclusivity as a mindset, I also kind of want to prompt us to understand teaching as relationality, that we should acknowledge the kind of relational dynamics and systems we are entering into when we're teaching. So as part of the document, and this is really kind of driven by Lindsay's practice, is that we're inviting you to think of inclusion and equity as a mindset muscle rather than actions one must take within the classroom setting. And Lindsay kind of equates this as developing a muscle that constantly needs to be stretched, worked and reworked and adapted to suit, and I love this, the ever-changing physiology of the field of education. And so with that, I kind of want to prompt some questions that maybe we can meditate on collectively. But the first thing we need to admit when we discuss inclusivity as a mindset is that, in the words of to paraphrase Jasbir Puar very loosely, the institution is inherently built to gatekeep and marginalize. If we are having conversations about inclusivity and equity, we by default acknowledge that we are not starting from that place, that the institution is inherently colonial, it is inherently patriarchal, it is inherently Western-centric, et cetera, et cetera. And so conversations of equity and inclusivity, while great, are merely replicating or exposing the dynamic that we are already operating under a colonial institution. And then if we acknowledge that and agree that we must work to decolonialize, to create a better system of education and relationality of being as teachers and learners, we then have to think about nourishing that inclusivity, that muscle that Lindsay's talking about in our own daily practices. And so I would ask you to reflect, what is the stretching routine for inclusivity? And I say this as somebody who identifies as disabled. I have a chronic pain condition and a limited physical condition, but I think about stretching very often for my own body. But what does it mean to stretch our inclusivity muscles? What does it mean to take on a stretching routine, a practice, an exercise routine for that? And then how could we collaborate with others on that journey? Who is your workout buddy on the inclusivity journey? Who helps you develop and stretch your muscles? Is there a community? Is there one person? And Yasmin, I know Yasmin's on this call. I saw Yasmin present at the CTL recently. And Yasmin, you were mentioning, acknowledging the teachers that you have learned from. So who are the teachers you have learned from in your inclusivity journey? And I'm so grateful, Yasmin, I hope you're still on this call, that you are one of my teachers in this journey as well. So in the document, after this prompt or calling into understanding inclusivity as essentially a personal practice that extends into the classroom rather than just tacked on actions we do offer strategies to help you develop that muscle and also help you, again, cultivate a mindset that knowingly walks into the classroom thinking about inclusivity, not as something to be done at the last minute, but constantly to walk in with. And these include mindset and attitude prompts like being patient with yourself, being responsive. It includes more forthright actions like what you can do on a syllabi or your curriculum documents to increase awareness of and create braver spaces around sexual and gender diversity. So one of our things we mentioned is having a land acknowledgement at the beginning of your course and in the syllabus, and as well having an inclusivity and diversity statement that clearly states who you are, your pronouns, your guiding practices, and what you expect the class to adhere to when you are navigating relations. You don't need to necessarily be teaching a class on gender and equity to have relational moments between students. All students will be in relation to one another, and all moments can potentially prompt that students have to maybe dialogue on certain things that will require meditation and intervention. As well, we have things about pronouns. Thank you, Robin. We have things about pronouns and your email signature. You could update your Zoom right now to have your pronoun in it. You could update your email signature today to have that. And what I want to leave us on is this idea of sharing who you are in the class, because students, as we all need to be, we need to orientate ourselves to one another. We need to come into relationships with one another. So when we think about gender and sexual diversity, we're not necessarily just thinking about queerness, transness, etc. We're thinking about how we are in space with one another and making those anchors known to people so they know how to anchor anchor themselves in relation to us as teachers, as learners, and students. So you'll see in the document more things like engaging with students and whatnot, but I wanted to prompt today these kind of larger, grander questions that we could dive into, and also questions to think about. What does it mean to do these things successfully? What does success look like when we're talking about inclusivity? And oftentimes I think it's about, again, exposing the cracks of those kind of colonial institutions and actually allowing students to come into a greater sense of knowing equity and justice. So feel free to kind of send me some questions either after this presentation as well. Lindsay and I welcome input on this document we are creating and hopefully releasing soon. So if you do want to email us, please feel free. We welcome it. Thank you, everyone.